Hey, my friends, you got Wes Spencer here, and I'm also joined by my friend Jason Slagle. Jason, what's going on?
Hello, how are you?
So we're going to talk about cyber insurance. How does that sound?
Boring, but we'll do it.
Someone's got to do it, right? So a couple things we wanted to share just from what's been happening in the news cycles this week. And you'd be surprised, like, there are actually things that happen on a weekly basis, even in insurance, Jason. Isn't that crazy?
It's pretty crazy.
So the first thing I wanted to talk about is this link that comes from Security Dive, Cybersecurity Dive, and it's an interesting one because it's just kind of covering what's been happening from last quarter into this one. And a lot of the news cycles that's been happening over the past year is insurance rates are quadrupling, they're going up, and that is true. I mean, there's a correlation, there's a direct correlation between, at a national level, how good we are at cybersecurity hygiene and how much we can keep premiums down. They're related, right? So if you have a whole lot of SKUs and lots of extra breaches, that's going to return in higher premiums.
Yeah, it's my understanding that insurance is capped at a profit rate, right? So they take what it costs them, they mark it up, and that's what we get charged, right?
Yep, exactly.
Makes perfect sense then.
So what the good news is, the silver lining in this is what we've seen over the past quarter is they're actually starting to stabilize.
Okay.
And that's huge, right? It doesn't mean that I think we're going to see a permanent stabilization in premium rates, but it does mean that we're starting to see things level off. So that kind of means that we're seeing some amount of like a volume reduction in the amount of like breaches that are reported and being paid out. What does that kind of track from a cybersecurity expert on your side? Does that kind of track with your view on like what's happening just in the landscape that we're seeing a reduction in attacks right now?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I have definitely seen a reduction in the number of ransomware attacks for sure, right? So, and I think some of that comes from people are a little bit afraid to pay right now because of concerns over banned states or states you're not allowed to do business with, right? So no one wants to pay Russia. So in many cases, people are less likely to pay, and if people don't pay, then there's less reason to do this.
Yep, absolutely. And I also think, as you mentioned, Russia, we're seeing their attention go elsewhere, right? And so there's no doubt a correlation of you have a huge international conflict and a reduction in cybercrime at the same time. But that also has spun up a lot of the concerns around, and this is what we're going to talk about next, what would it look like if there's some kind of huge national cyber attack that is part of a cyber war? We've talked about that for decades, but I think what we're seeing in this conflict has really spun that back up is what would that look like for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're starting to see, isn't there some carve-outs now that a lot of policies won't cover state-sponsored cyber attacks as part of a war?
Yeah, you are. Lloyd's of London was the first to come out with that, and that makes sense given that they're primarily in the UK, and they're far closer to that conflict. We've always been that way in the sense of like that terrorism and war has always been a carve out, right? If someone flies over and drops a bomb on this building, insurance is not going to cover that if it's part of war. So they're just sort of clarifying that from the cybersecurity piece, but the big question is the kinetics of it, right?
Yeah.
So if I have a bullet flying, there's a kinetic element there that I can say, hey, that was shot from a soldier from another country, blah, 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 but it's much more difficult on the cyber side to attribute, is this an act of war? Is this just, something that's happening just as an individual?
A lot of these groups are not actually state sponsored, they're just state permitted, right? So at what point, if it's not actually a government entity, do you draw that line?
Exactly right. So the other piece that we wanted to talk about that's dropped this past week, and this one, Jason, is monumental. It's a big deal. Now, we're not going to see anything come out of it right away, but we are going to see this generate a lot of buzz. And this is coming here from Bloomberg Law, and I've seen this covered in other sources as well. So the Treasury Department has requested input on what would a federal cyber insurance program look like. And we're talking about a federally funded insurance program, very similar to what we see in flood, what we see in some of the terrorism post 2001. Does that shock you to see that the government is at least interested in querying the public on what that would look like?
A little bit. I'm very curious how that will play out, right? Because the government has been pretty anti-ransom, right? So, will they just not cover ransom at all?
Yeah, right. We'll have to find out, and that's probably some good things to ask inside commentary to get more information. And I mean, currently right now, it's targeted towards what would this look like for what's called critical infrastructure? And if you don't know that term, that's sort of a federally designated term around certain industries that are very, very important to the U.S. economy. So things like banking, finance, believe it or not, things like railway, things like electric grids. There's a number of these industries. You actually go look them up. These are specified. So right now the focus is what would it look like just for them? But I think there's a lot of like caveats and things we really got to think about, because this is not going to be just a complete, hey, here's free money for you so you don't have to worry about security. I think the goal for this, the intent for it, is only if there's a catastrophic level, very focused attack that's maybe part of a broader physical war, right? And so I think that's the only way that this would really fall out.
Yeah, I can see that. It'll be quite interesting for our space, the MSP space in particular, because MSPs support those entities in some cases, and will it push more regulation as far as security goes, right? Are we going to see CMMC actually move to that critical infrastructure, for instance, because now the government is backing the insurance on them?
Yep. Yeah, exactly right. So this is something we'll keep our eyes and ears on, and would love to even maybe put in some commentary from the Fifth Wall side on what we think about our ideas around all of this. But I think you're right. There's a SMB element to this. There's a huge industry element to all of this. And it's years in the making, right? The government doesn't move quickly. They're just accepting initial comments. We're still years away. Don't panic on like what this could look like. But I do think it's an interesting thought. I think it's a natural thought that they might have, and we'll see what comes out of this in terms of like what kind of information they would require, what the minimum standards would be to be eligible for this. But Jason, I think just the last comment I have is this is just one more little piece of momentum towards the federal government coming in, at least to some degree, designating what good cyber hygiene looks like in different ways.
Yeah, I think that you're not going to put that genie back in the bottle at this point.
Yeah, that's really well said.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts from this in terms of what's happening in the insurance world around you?
No, I mean, it's there's still the same things I'm seeing every day, people not getting insured due to lack of MFA and things like that, but yeah, it seems pretty good.
Fantastic. Well, Jason, thank you for joining me on this week's Roundup on Cyber Insurance News. If you guys have any other questions, reach out to us, FifthWallSolutions.com. Thank you guys so much.